Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Rachel Dembosh.
Dembash. How's it
Phew, I was
going?
getting worried there for a minute. I was like, uh-oh, I'm logging.
Sorry. Having a little technical confusion on our end for a minute. Welcome, Dr. Klein. It's nice to meet you.
Yep, you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Um, so yeah, thank you. And just call me Janet. And Jeanette, I just texted you back. Thank you for that. I was like, I don't know who starts the meeting.
Well, I knew it was either Rachel or Sharina.
Yeah, usually Sharina does it, but she had an appointment that she couldn't miss, so she will probably be joining us just a little bit later.
Okay.
And Mujahid will be here once the thing starts, but he has class that's ending right at noon, so.
So so will I share the PowerPoint from my computer?
Yes, usually what works best is for you to do it if you're comfortable doing it.
That's fine. I pulled my talk up on the other computer and it'll be about 40 to 45 minutes just so that I don't rush through and I
That's
figure,
great.
you know.
That's okay. A mature audience will listen for 45 minutes.
We will.
Unless, we get disconnected, then it'll be
Hopefully that won't happen. You want to share your screen quickly just to make sure everything is
sure.
working the way it should?
Um, Oops, let's go. So it's not a very exciting PowerPoint. Let's see, wait, let me.
Janet,
It's
you
not,
got your grades turned in yesterday. I'm
I
sure it's
know.
great.
So yes, as a result, we do not have an exciting PowerPoint. Um,
That
it's not.
absolutely fine. As long as there's something to rest the eye on, that's all we care about.
Why is my hand up?
Huh.
Interesting question.
Let's see.
Usually the reaction and then just click at the hands down thing. Let me see if that's something I can do. No, doesn't look like it.
Oh, it's down.
Okay.
I don't know where that is either, actually.
Okay.
Was it
I
way
must
off?
have just waved my hands around and then it was like, you know,
Yeah, that's these new AI features.
yeah. So yeah, I just turned grades in last night and I also care for my 95-year-old mom. So
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
I
that's a
mean,
lot.
thank God she's doing pretty well, but she lives just around the corner from me, but she had just lots of appointments because her stupid personal assistant somehow wasn't thinking and scheduled them all for finals, like when for grading. And so, yeah, but it's kind of a lot. So that's why we have a really kind of bare bones PowerPoint. But I figured at least it could be something that non-native speakers might be able to follow along and pick up some of the uh, works that I mentioned because it's kind of historiographical. So,
Mhm. Nice.
Uh, I just barely got parked here, so making sure everything got started okay. Looks like Janet, you're set up well, and Jeanette, you're good with the intro and such.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
fine. Do we know what the topic is for the February talk? I didn't.
February. Let me see. I just actually finalized things
You actually
last
did.
night and confirmed with almost all of the spring speakers. So let me bring that up here. I think it's Shana Abdullah.
Oh,
She'll be
Shana Abdullah, right?
yes, and
Heritage agricultural practices.
yeah,
Wow.
the
Yeah.
food sovereignty and local farmers, oral traditions and heritage. I'll send it to you here, Jeanette.
Okay, I'm writing that down.
It's February 11.
And I assume that's a Wednesday at the same
Yes.
time, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So I
And
wish that I had been able to attend your talks, but I always teach at 1 o'clock Eastern time, always, because I don't even alternate between Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday, because I have these standing meetings, including faculty senate, and on Tuesdays, Thursdays, so I can't really change.
that's good. You've
So,
got a faculty senate. That's
oh yeah, well, I've been watching what's been happening at UT Austin, and here in Ohio, we have, oh my God, well, we've gone through several rifts and retrenchments, and then in Ohio, there's Senate Bill 1, which passed, which is just like this total anti-education bill, and we have to post our syllabi online so that we can be doxxed and all of that. So
Oh, okay.
Mm,
yeah.
Unbelievable.
And I teach a course on genocide and minorities, borders, and partitions, and and I teach about Palestine, and even though I'm Jewish, they can accuse me of being anti-Semitic. It's just the absurdities of it all right now. So
Yes.
it's just absurd.
It's a bit too interesting of times to live in these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
But no, so keep going to your Senate meetings. That's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how many people usually attend?
The number varies, but we go upwards of 20 normally. 20 and it goes up. I think our highest is like around 80. That was for Rausha,
Singer.
pop singer
Pop
from
singer. So yes.
Turkey, Kurdistan. So yeah, but we've been averaging around between 30 to 40. So decent turnout, and depends on which topic. Politics seems to get more people. We next semester, I think we've got all but one here confirmed. So we're about ready to go. I'm pretty sure it's the end of semester thing. So I'm waiting to hear back from just the one person here this week. So we're good, I think, for next semester. Some literature, poetry topics, Jeanette. No, that might interest you.
Great. Yeah.
I try to give a varied topics. So politics, a little bit of literature, and history. We all try to make sure it's well-rounded.
So you haven't gone to your appointment yet?
No, I did, and I hurried back. Thankfully, the baby fell asleep in the car, so it made it easier to focus. So she's still napping right now, alhamdulillah.
Good.
She charmed the doctor's office and got herself a lollipop. So yeah, well, I think it's 12:57. Usually we've been we start letting people in at 12:57 my time. We start letting people in right on time, and then start about 5 minutes later, right, Rachel, to give people time to trickle in. I will hand things off to you then, Rachel. I added spotlight to Jeanette. Janet already has a spotlight on.
Yep, spotlighting looks good. So yeah.
Yeah,
I'll wait.
I was going to say, should I aim to, if the I was gonna say, should I aim to wrap it up by 1:15, which I guess would be
Uh,
like an hour and 15
yeah,
minutes?
see how it's going. If the conversation is lively, you're welcome to keep it going a little longer, or whenever you find kind of a natural stopping place, I'd say. Sometimes the question period kind of devolves, and it's better to just pull the plug before things get.
That's my
Yeah, and also
observation.
I know people might want to talk about like current events, but really I'm just trying to
Yeah.
do something like with the conceptual framing rather
Mhm.
than like
Yeah.
really I'm not a political scientist. It's not my area of expertise. Actually, I just need to grab a piece of paper and I will be right back.
Sure.
Yeah, I haven't been here. I haven't been able to come all fall either because I also have been teaching a class at exactly this time.
Yes.
But I do remember it always seems like inevitably somebody asks sort of some general political question and then you know it's time for it to end.
Yes, yep. There, strange things come in the chat, and at the beginning, you should probably read every question just to give people time to, get their heads around what they want to ask. But,
Will I be able to see who's here and
um, I think you will be able to see participants,
okay.
right? Yeah.
And the chat?
Yes, the chat will be visible to you. So, Jeanette, if you want to pick and choose questions, if we get a lot, you're welcome to. But Janet, if you want to just read what's there and, go down the line, that's also fine. Um,
I defer to you. So
I like I said, I wish that I had been able to attend, but I haven't until my semester was over. So
no,
like
it's
you can
whatever.
expect like a variety of questions, like some that are better quality than others.
Sure.
There always so
yeah.
so I think it's fine to like sort of pick through them, like
Absolutely. And, we give slight preference to the people who want to come on camera and ask it themselves. So,
Okay.
if you see somebody with a hand up, we might go through all of those before we do the reserve questions in the chat.
Okay.
But yeah, pick things that you're
You
comfortable
you
with.
may see me diplomatically deflect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just because a question has been asked doesn't mean you can't say whatever you want to say. The floor is still yours.
Thank you.
oh, and we also do we stop recording before the Q&A or we just cut that
Um,
part out later?
is the recording on at the moment is a good question.
It is because
Yes,
I
it
got the
is. Okay, yeah. Usually we record straight through, but I think when we post it on the YouTube channel, we don't usually keep all the questions in. I mean, we don't do a lot of fancy editing on it. We just chop it and but okay, it's 12:01, so I guess I will start letting people in and you guys can hang out for 3 or 4 minutes and get going. Okay.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you. I'm gonna disappear.
I guess we'll stay visible. The one good thing about having the PowerPoint too is you don't have to look at yourself in large screen for so long.
Right.
Sometimes I prefer to turn myself off so I just don't see myself.
Yeah.
And I also finished my grading last night at 10 p.m. So
Oh,
understand.
it's a lot. What were you teaching this semester?
Well, I teach Turkish, the
Mhm.
language, all the time, but I was also teaching a new pilot course on Kurdish fiction and film, which was a lot of fun. Yeah. But the last paper I was slogging through was a doctoral
Milan.
2 months paper on the Gothic motifs in Suat Dervish's novels. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's sort of a newly discovered early 20th century socialist Turkish
Mm-mm.
writer.
Mm-mm. I don't know her.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes.
How many people are in now, Jeanette?
Let's see, 26, probably including us.
Okay. I can't see.
Yeah, I can't see everyone either.
I
So
can only see a
I
couple
only see
people.
it in the sidebar, but lots of people. I will wait until 12:05 and then start.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. So it's 12:05. It looks like we have a quorum and we'll get started. My name is Jeanette Okur, and I am a student of Kurmanji at Zahra Institute, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to what is the last event in the fall speaker series. Um, our spring speaker series, I would like to let you know, will begin in February with a talk by Shana Abdullah called Food Sovereignty and Local Farmers' Oral Traditions and Heritage. And that will be on February 11th, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Chicago time. Today, we're very happy to welcome Dr. Janet Klein, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. Janet Klein received her undergraduate degree from the University of Montana and her master's and Ph.D. from Princeton University. Her book, The Margins of Empire, Kurdish Militias in the Ottoman Tribal Zone, was published by Stanford University Press in 2011 and was translated into Turkish in 2013. Dr. Klein has also authored numerous articles and book chapters on various topics related to late Ottoman and post-Ottoman Kurdish and Armenian histories. She teaches courses on the modern Middle East and the Ottoman Empire, as well as on topics such as nationalism, identity politics, mass violence, borderlands, and partitions. And very important, she's also a founding member and associate editor of the Kurdish Studies Journal as well. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Klein, and we're very excited to hear your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Okur. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And so I'll just get started on the talk. I just want people to know it's not covering exhaustively, the topic, but rather an intervention into perhaps the conceptual framework that we're dealing with. So I've studied Kurdish society for some time now, and I continue to be struck by the weight that violence has carried in discussions of Kurds, whether in academic or political circles or in popular culture. From 19th century European sources that portray Kurdish tribal society as uniquely violent, prone to lawlessness and banditry, to Ottoman state sources that conceived of Kurds in the same way, to popular culture portrayals of Kurds today as especially misogynistic and terroristic. These are narratives that are often reflected in the mainstream media as fact. And violence in Kurdistan has only begun to be conceptualized in a manner that begins to historicize what has too often been explained in tribal or cultural terms. So today, what I'm going to try to do briefly is to historicize, to capture where we are historiographically in the study of violence in Kurdistan, and to offer a couple of ways that we might be able to better conceptualize this violence by drawing on theoretical interventions from scholars working outside of Kurdish studies. My focus is primarily the turn of the 20th century, which is really the foundational period for the expansion of state and colonial violence in Kurdistan and the minoritization of Kurds in the Ottoman Empire and post-Ottoman states in Iran. These are processes that I hope to demonstrate are interconnected. So, as a helpful frame, I'd like to first consider how two works on violence in the Middle East treat violence in Kurdistan. And then we'll zoom in on some more specific studies. So first of all, we have Hamid Bozarslan's Violence in the Middle East, which was published in 2004. And it is distinctive for centering the Kurds within a regional analysis of violence, which is something that not a lot of Middle Eastern histories do at all. And so Bozarslan identifies three phases in this violence. First, we have 19th century imperial breakdown in the Ottoman and Iranian worlds. And this destabilized local authority and turned communal relations violent amid competing nationalisms. And so the second phase, from the 1920s to the 1940s, followed the partition of Ottoman Kurdistan, when militarized borders criminalized Kurdish cross-border social ties and unified diverse Kurdish actors in resistance to state nationalism. A third phase for Bozarslan emerged after the 1958 Iraqi coup, as Kurdish activism shifted to urban spaces and younger generations radicalized. Movements initially focused on autonomy increasingly embraced sustained violence, sometimes turning inward. So although Bozarslan's late Ottoman analysis I find to be dated, his work is, I think, especially valuable for its focus on post-colonial regimes, the privatization of violence, and political fatalism under conditions of permanent crisis. Well, the framework that I will suggest for understanding violence in Kurdistan is different than that put forth by Bozarslan. I think that his extensive focus on Kurdistan in a volume devoted to the Middle East, and I just want to emphasize that at large, is a useful framing, and I'll add more to this suggestion presently. So the other volume that I'd like to draw attention to here as part of just this frame is Laura Robson's recent book, The Politics of Mass Violence in the Middle East, which came out in 2021. So just as we are here trying to reframe and historicize the violence in Kurdish society that has been identified as cultural and inherent to Kurdish society itself, Robson has similarly been motivated to recast and historicize violence in the Middle East at large. And she sees this as a result in the context of colonial powers' pursuit of material and strategic gains throughout the long 20th century.
Excuse me, Janet, we cannot see any slides now if you have them up.
Can you see them?
Yes, I see.
I can see them as well. Is there anyone else who cannot see them?
Yeah, we can proceed. I think it's visible, ma'am. There's no problem.
Okay. So Robson's work notes the centrality of territorialized identity politics, and she argues that violence has been the chief means by which post-colonial regimes and elites have acquired power and material benefits. So the emphasis on Robson's work is the Mashriq, and thus Kurdistan features only in discussions of Iraq and Syria. Okay, so framing this, these are two studies of violence in the Middle East. And towards the end of my talk today, I want to explore how we might, or at least raise the question, how we might reconcile the different narratives put forth by Bozarslan and Robson as I draw on work outside of the fields of Kurdish, Ottoman, or Middle Eastern studies per se, to suggest possibly more fruitful ways to approach the topic of violence in Kurdistan. So in the meantime, however, let's consider newer works that are specifically devoted to the Kurdish case or cases. And so one publication that's very recent, and I contributed a chapter to this, is this volume edited by Ayça Alemdaroğlu and Müge Göçek called Kurds in Dark Times, New Perspectives on Violence and Resistance in Turkey. So in this volume, authors move from macro level analyses of violence to more micro studies that foreground how oppressed communities understand and navigate their own experiences through everyday power negotiations in local contexts. So notable among these contributions are those by Barış Ünlü, who explores how the so-called Turkishness contract has hierarchically structured day-to-day relations between Kurds and Turks. We also have, and there are many others, but I'm just highlighting a couple here, Gülistan Yarkın's study of Kurds in the mid to late 20th century Istanbul and how their stigmatization has further suppressed them economically. We also have Deniz Duruiz's ethnography of the racialization of Kurdish laborers in Turkish-owned farm communities in Western Turkey. So these and the many other thoughtful contributions to this volume, and also many other outside the volume as well, highlight the ways in which micro-level studies or of raw or symbolic violence in Kurdistan have structured relationships between Kurds and the dominant groups and states in which they live. But what I'm asking is where a future historical account of violence in Kurdistan might be able to draw on these various studies to produce an account that considers the specificities of the Kurdish case as a whole and in its settler colonial subdivisions, and that views violence in Kurdistan as connected to violence in wider Middle Eastern contexts. And I asked, how might exploring violence in the Middle East from the vantage point of Kurdistan contribute to the discussion on regional violence? How might we draw on extant literature to produce an account of violence in Kurdistan over the long 20th century? So today I'd like to suggest that we explore some approaches that scholars outside of the fields of Kurdish or even Middle Eastern studies have begun to articulate, which might help us place some of these excellent recent micro studies into a broader framework. And so in this, I hope that my connection between minoritization, territorialization, and securitization might benefit from the theoretical work, which we're going to play around with a little bit today, of Dirk Moses. And specifically, I'm speaking of his recent work, The Problems of Genocide, Permanent Security, and the Language of Transgression, in further theorizing about violence in Kurdistan, and perhaps also how the Kurdish case might test Moses's theories on what he views as the ultimate driver of mass violence. And this is the quest for permanent security. I also hope to join Moses's work to the work of Gyanendra Pandey's theoretical contributions to the study of how minorities and majorities are created in order to arrive at a more nuanced understanding of violence in Kurdistan. And lastly, I want to emphasize that the periodization that is implied by the term post-colonial, which is often used to describe Kurd situations after World War I, is a bit misleading because for Kurds, colonialism lives on, and so does ongoing settler violence. Sorry, doggy there. All right. So in the opening of the problems of genocide, Moses argues that genocide is problematic in two distinct senses. So it refers not only to the catastrophic reality of mass killing, but also to the ways in which the relatively recent legal and conceptual category of genocide shapes and distorts how we understand the destruction of civilians. So starting from the international legal principle that non-combatants should be protected from military violence, he contends that the moral hierarchy embedded in this framework, which elevates genocide as the ultimate crime, obscures other forms of state-inflicted civilian harm. Practices such as aerial bombardment, drone and missile strikes that are framed as collateral damage, as well as blockades and sanctions, these often escape comparable scrutiny, he says. So for Moses, the discourse of genocide thus operates ideologically, diverting attention from systematic violence against civilian populations carried out by states, including those in the West. And he attributes this pattern of violence to what he calls the logic of permanent security. And this is the drive by states and by armed movements aspiring to statehood to eliminate all perceived threats. Because absolute security is unattainable, this pursuit fosters a paranoid mindset that normalizes indiscriminate force and makes civilian suffering an inevitable outcome. So I think that the permanent security paradigm that Moses articulates is helpful for understanding violence against the Kurds on imperial, colonial, statewide, and transnational levels, and accounts also for what Bozarsan has called the fratricidal violence by Kurdish political groups. And to be sure, Kurds have experienced genocide. But I think Moses's paradigm helps us to better understand the totality and kind of the historical nature of violence against the Kurds, beginning in the late Ottoman period and becoming fully articulated after World War I. Additionally, it sits well with and adds to works on the violence of minoritization and is compatible with understanding ongoing colonial violence. And so today I'll walk us through the historiographical highlights of violence in Kurdistan, and will offer a new framework for students of both Kurds and Kurdistan and the wider Middle East to consider. And I'd like to just offer a little bit more framing here. So the Kurds are commonly referred to as the largest nation without a state. And while the vast majority of Kurds are citizens of the states they live in and do not conform to the legal definition of statelessness, the fact of their political statelessness has been central to much of the violence Kurds in post-Ottoman states in Iran have experienced. The Kurds' statelessness has led to the internal colonization of their lands, as well as what Ismail Beshichi has called their existence in an international colony, the brutal process of being minoritized in the non-Kurdish nationalist states in which they live, and the violence of being regarded as a permanent security threat in all of the states that comprise historic Kurdistan, all of which I'll hopefully detail a little bit presently. So the Kurds have comprised the most sociologically significant minority, according to Samim Akgün'ün. And in Turkey, but I would also say in Iraq, Syria, and Iran as well. And I also think that they've been the most securitized group. The literature on the securitization of Kurds is mainly on Kurds in Turkey. There are fewer studies on Iraq, Syria, and Iran. The securitization literature on the Kurds focuses almost exclusively from the 1980s to the present and often doesn't provide much historical context. Securitization theory at large, in fact, and those studies on Kurds in particular have mostly been authored by political scientists and sociologists after the theory emerged in the late 1980s and 1990s. One theorist of securitization notes that the key idea underlying it is that an issue is given sufficient saliency to win the assent of the audience, which enables those who are authorized to handle the issue to use whatever means they deem most appropriate. In other words, securitization combines the politics of threat design with that of threat management. So in recent studies, scholars analyzing securitization in the Kurds have published some important findings, and a few of those include Maurizio Gheri has looked at the ways in which the securitization of Kurds has impeded progress in Turkey's democratization. Burak Bilgehan Özpek contends that the AKP has used its control over securitization to suppress opposition, with shifts in Kurdish policy driven by political survival rather than a coherent national security doctrine. Nazan Bedirhanoğlu identifies two key periods of Kurdish securitization in Turkey, 1978 to 2002 and 2016 to 2018. And she argues that security practices first tested in Kurdish cities later provided the model for nationwide authoritarian governance after the 2016 coup attempt. In one study on Iran, in a singular study on Iran, Soleimani and Mohammedpur have described the securitization policies there, which have restricted Kurds' daily activities and worked towards the fragmentation of Kurdish society in Iran. So these studies of securitization are important and compelling, but they tend to view securitization as episodic. Instead, I would suggest that there are features of this paradigm of Kurds as security threats that have a longer history that we need to explore, which helps us understand the constructions of Kurds as permanent security threats, beginning in the late Ottoman period and extending into the present in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So in other words, Kurdish communities and individuals and Kurdistan as a space became molded into securitized subjects and spaces, not episodically, but historically and permanently. Overt raw violence may have been or may still be episodic, but the construction of the Kurds as a permanent security threat entailed ongoing, daily, real, and symbolic violence described by Bozarslan, not in the sense that Bourdieu understood as the internalization of the mechanisms of domination and submission, but instead as one that prepared, legitimized, and allowed the continuation of the physical violence. It led to the dehumanization of the Kurds, neutralizing the crimes committed against them and their identity, as Bozarslan put it. So this is the violence involved in the construction of naturalized nations, of natural communities and histories, majorities and minorities, in the words of Pandey, and this is the violence of minoritization. So Kurds, with the exception of the denationalized Kurds in Syria, have been citizens of the states they live in. And yet, to the dominant groups in those states, Turks, Arabs, Persians, they become what Pandey calls marked citizens. The Indian case that Pandey studies is especially relevant for us here, because, like with partition between India and Pakistan, those groups who were incorporated into the state, now seen as belonging to another dominant group, had to prove that they were loyal. The search was on for the genuine, unambiguously loyal citizen. Pandey explains loyalty to the nation, the widely touted test of true, unquestioned citizenship, becomes loyalty to an already existing state and the interests of that state and all that it stands for, and even literally where it stands. There's usually a catch in all of this. The test of loyalty is in fact required only of those who are not real natural citizens. In India, this loyalty, to the extent that a Muslim could ever really be viewed as loyal, could be demonstrated by putting their lives on the line in a future war with Pakistan. But they could never even achieve that goal because, as Pandey writes, in the course of the anti-colonial struggle, when people of every other community joined in a common fight for freedom, the Muslims stood in the way. They made separatist demands, they played into the hands of the British, and they were rewarded finally with the prize of Pakistan, from where Hindus were now being driven out. Thus, the foundational struggle for independence would mark those who fought on another side as forever disloyal. And I would say there's a parallel here with the Turkish nationalist narrative of the struggle for independence. Kurds would be similarly marked as untrustworthy. Although some Kurds did indeed fight with the Kemalists, believing in this promise of Turkish-Kurdish brotherhood, this was conveniently disregarded in the founding myth of the nation. Only loyal Turks fought in the war. As Lerna Ekmekcioglu puts it, the political elite of the new Turkey, almost all veterans of the national resistance, believed that the War of Independence had given birth to their freedom and saved their honor. The war thus became the mother, Anna, of the fatherland, Vatan. And in the years to come, those who shared this mother and shed blood in her defense would be considered brothers. Those who did not fight were relegated to being stepbrothers, if not foreigners. And this is her concept of step citizens. So Ekmekcioglu is speaking here of Christians, but I would say the same applies to Kurds. So in the construction of the foundation myths and other state-building practices that set the stage for the formation of the natural loyal citizen and the disloyal marked citizen, Kurds became the latter in all of the states into which they were incorporated. Because Kurdistan was now permanently split between four countries with the post-war treaties and the resolution of the Mosul question, Kurds came to be regarded as a permanent security threat, not just a group whose identity did not conform to that of the dominant group, but as a people who would forever be a menace to the territorial integrity of these states, particularly as a cross-border group who was thought to benefit not only from the sporadic intervention of great powers, but those just across the border. The framing of the Kurds as a permanently destabilizing threat in the borderlands led to the denationalization of hundreds of thousands of Kurds in Syria and the plan to completely eliminate Kurds from the Jazeera and to allocate their lands to Arab settlers, which was being implemented alongside more general policies of forcible Arabization in the 1960s and 1970s, for example, as Robson discusses. It also led to the massive transfer scheme to break up and weaken Iraq's Kurdish communities in the 1970s. This culminated in the brutal Anfal campaign, during which the Iraqi army bombed, gassed, and razed over some 200,000 Kurdish villagers and their villages. And it's noteworthy, again, as Robson draws our attention to this, that it's noteworthy that Saddam Hussein's cousin, Ali Hassan al-Majid, had constructed a 2-year plan to completely eradicate the Kurdish presence in what he labeled as security areas. So Robson sees the Unfall campaign as having arisen within a longer history of colonial and post-colonial violence. She writes, the post-colonial Iraqi state, responding to the specific circumstances of its colonization, occupation, and struggle for sovereignty, had long relied on brutality and especially bloodshed in the name of territoriality to establish its own validity. And so the framework, the colonial framework that Robson employs as the central lens through which to view violence in the Middle East, emphasizes how throughout the 20th century, external invaders repeatedly deployed violence to promote their own material interests, in the process creating a fragmented political landscape in which bloodshed became the only way of laying claim to territory and power for both state and non-state actors. The colonial and post-colonial states saw resistance to state territorialization, which often began to take on sectarian tones, labeling minority communities as national enemies, mustering new and exclusionary national identifications as modes of anti-colonial solidarity, and sometimes mobilizing new minority separatisms as a mode of resisting state control. So what Robson is describing is the process of minoritization laid out by Pandey. And sometimes, as we know from Kurdish history, these processes resulted in genocide. So it's undeniable that genocide has been committed against Kurds in Turkey and Iraq. But explaining mass violence against the Kurds might be further assisted if we consider Moses's arguments by taking a broader view of civilian destruction, which indicates that national emergencies and proclamations of security threats are the drivers of such violence. For Moses, permanent security is a praxis in which human groups, civilians, are targeted collectively and preventatively as security threats. The social fact of racial or religious difference or even prejudice does not cause genocidal violence. The securitization of groups, whether racialized or otherwise defined, is the driver of excessive violence, as he puts it. Thus, although we think of genocide as the crime of crimes, the criminal drive for permanent security, including its routine forms articulated by Pandey and its symbolic forms described by Bozarslan, might better capture what the Kurds have endured over the long 20th century. If we also add the element of internal colonialism and recognize that genocidal violence and the violence of securitization are not mutually exclusive. So Moses draws attention to the fact that imperial and national elites have constantly been worried about security on their peripheries. And as examples, he notes the deportation of close to 1 million Jews by the Imperial Russian army because they were suspected of sympathizing with and spying for the Germans. He also cites a case that's close to ours here, which is the deportation and massacres of Ottoman Armenians. But he elaborates, if security anxieties have led to genocidal measures of military coercion, another policy option has been to colonize one's own borderlands. This has been true for empires as well as nation states. Some examples: Imperial Germany countered what they perceived as Polonization with Germanization, distributing Polish lands to German colonists. These are examples Moses gives. The Sri Lankans also engaged in rural colonization schemes to displace the Tamils. But these practices generally spark resistance, which, quote, leads to reprisals and counterinsurgency that can aim to keep destroying a presumed enemy to achieve a permanent security, that never again would such resistance occur. So this resistance to internal colonialism has sparked the similar quest for permanent security by states where Kurds live, but not just in the 20th century. The idea that Kurdistan is an internal colony or multiple colonies gained prominence when Kurdish resistance organizations began to frame the experiences of Kurds as one of internal colonization in the late 1970s. And this goes back to an idea basically from the 1930s. Recently, important works on Kurdistan as an internal colony have brought some validation, but also nuance to the concept. The movement to decolonize the field of Kurdish studies itself has prompted scholars to also consider the ways in which Kurdistan and the Kurds have been colonized historically, in addition to addressing epistemological matters in scholarship. So important steps in this project are evidenced, for example, in the recently published South Atlantic Studies Quarterly, which has been devoted to this very topic. As the editors note, against the backdrop of works that have tended to conceptualize the quote, examination of Kurds within nation-state contexts, predominantly utilizing frameworks centered on citizenship, minority rights, political participation, and human rights, a new generation of scholars has revitalized the notion of Kurdistan as a colony and sought to analyze the contemporary plight of Kurds within the framework of coloniality and the socioeconomic, political, ideological, and cultural institutions it created, unquote. So these studies have brought an important dimension to understanding the violence post-Ottoman states in Iran have unleashed on Kurds, and Kurdistan as colonial violence. But the question of earlier colonialism remains. Much more research is needed on the longer Ottoman period, but Nilay Özök Gündoğan's work on extractive colonialism is important. It makes a solid argument that Kurdistan's colonial status had already begun in the Ottoman Empire, long before the post-World War I map of nation states was ever imagined, and even before the late Ottoman period, when the colonial relationship has generally been assumed to have begun. So most works that have described the governing relationship of the Ottoman state to Kurdistan as colonial have focused on the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including my own, and have commonly viewed Ottoman colonialism in terms of its discursive or administrative phenomena, and have mostly neglected its political economy background. So there is significant evidence for characterizing the Ottoman relationship to Kurdistan as one of colonialism and even settler colonialism in the late Ottoman period. I'll comment on that in a moment. But as Özök Gündoğan demonstrates convincingly in her study of the Ergani Keban mines of Kurdistan in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, extractive colonialism began to embody this relationship much earlier in the early modern period, in fact. And as she writes, the Keban and Ergani mines demonstrate how this massive state-led extraction project, tailored to the needs of an imperial state at war, transferred the subterranean resources of Kurdistan for the imperial capital's needs. It highlights the pivotal role mineral extraction had in advancing Ottoman colonialism in Kurdistan through economic exploitation, environmental damage, heightened state control, and the suppression of local autonomy. Although we tend to associate Ottoman settler colonialism in Kurdistan with violence in the late Ottoman period through its displacement of locals, first Armenians and then Kurds, through the appropriation of their lands, murder, and dispossession due to the settlement of nomadic tribes and immigrants from the Caucasus, Özök Gündoğan establishes that violence was also part and parcel of the extractive mining projects much earlier and was connected to later developments. So one central thread that connects the extractive colonialism of the early modern period to some of the later violence that I've written about elsewhere has been the struggle over land. As one of the main portrayals of violence in Kurdistan has been one of inherent, persistent communal strife, of course, with Kurds as the aggressors. My dissertation, then book, became one of the first works to demonstrate that this intercommunal violence had a material basis, that the Ottoman state had a significant hand in instrumentalizing local violence for its own ends. So the Central Ottoman government empowered select Kurdish tribes, called the Hamidiye Light Cavalry, to police the empire's eastern borderlands, ostensibly against Armenian revolutionary activities beginning in 1890. These state-sanctioned tribal chiefs used their privileges and impunity to usurp land from weaker Kurds, and especially Armenians, who were now increasingly viewed as a territorial threat, a threat to the territorial integrity of the empire after 1878. The militarization of Kurdistan, which Özök Gündoğan reveals began earlier, was magnified exponentially at this point. What began as a conflict over resources exploded into a battle of international dimensions as the great powers stepped in to monitor the region and to protect its Christian inhabitants. Anti-Armenian violence rose as Armenians became minoritized and securitized, which caused Armenian revolutionaries to expand their activities in response. And the Kurds and Armenians who lived in the region faced new challenges of living under increasingly violent conditions. So this is the period that Bozarslan points to as the beginning of violence in Kurdistan, when this tacit contract between the Ottoman state and the Kurdish emirates came to an end as the state centralized and destroyed the Kurdish principalities, thus leaving a power vacuum to be filled by the sheikhs. Until recently, however, this very frequently repeated story, which was rather unsatisfying, because it maintained this narrative gap between what the state was doing in Kurdistan, what the state was doing, in other words, driven centrally, and what was actually happening in Kurdistan that conditioned these changes. And the book that filled out and fleshed out this gap was another work by Nilay Özök Gündoğan, and this is her Kurdish Nobility in the Ottoman Empire, Loyalty, Autonomy, and Privilege, which was published in 2022. I think this book is important because it continued to explore what unfolded in Kurdistan as an Ottoman story, as the Kurdish Begs' hereditary privileges and exemptions came to an end when they were no longer serving the needs of a changing state. So my own work has focused on the period after 1878, and Özök Gündoğan's study demonstrates that the struggle between these Kurdish Begs, Armenian financiers, and the tillers of the land began to play out much earlier, resulting in conflicts over claims to the land or its surplus. All right, there's one more element of the Ottoman colonial dynamic that I'll talk about today that is connected to this cycle of violence that we should explore before trying to tie some of these threads together. And this is nomad and refugee resettlement, which is also connected to the conflict over land and other resources. The desire of the Central Ottoman government to sedentarize nomads was not new in Ottoman history, as we can see by Reşat Kasabah's work, for one. But as with other state-making efforts in the 19th century and into the 20th, it took on a fresh meaning and urgency. By settling nomadic pastoralists and turning them into agriculturalists, the state hoped to make them more legible for taxation and conscription and to boost agricultural productivity. The state also wished to break the tribal identities, bonds, and allegiances by making the average tribesperson a settled farmer who owed his livelihood to the state and not to the tribal leader. These efforts were an essential part of modern Ottoman state-building efforts in Kurdistan. The work to create loyal Ottoman citizens out of Kurdish tribes, who were almost all Muslim, through these settlement projects would also accomplish the goal of replacing the Christian population, which was now viewed as a threat, with Muslims, seen more loyal. There was also the question of where to house the millions of Muslim refugees streaming in from the Russian Empire and the Balkans. Although the general policy of the Ottoman government was to not install Circassian immigrants in Eastern Anatolia because the Russians were opposed to that, as Vladimir Hamid Troyansky actually shows, there were many settled there nonetheless, causing further violent displacement of Armenians and Kurds as well. And as the memoirs of an Armenian revolutionary show us, they often banded together to resist this process. Ella Fratantuono's work makes it clear that Ottoman settlement policies were integral to Ottoman internal colonization, state building, territoriality, and population politics. And indeed, as Donald Bloxham notes, that at least one contemporary observer saw these moves as a sort of inner colonization, an attempt to consolidate Ottoman control of the land by installation of ethnically reliable subjects in the stead of untrustworthy ones. So this is the dynamic of settler colonialism, which we see in other cases as well, but with the unique specificity of Ottoman political subtleties. One of the distinctive aspects of Ottoman internal settler colonialism is that the Ottomans experienced ongoing dismemberment partially at the behest of great power imperialism. And many Ottomans viewed these internal resettlement projects in this light. So through this process, quote, it became clear that territoriality and the making of minorities would be clearly connected when the socio-political identities of specific groups became linked to the threat posed by challenges to Ottoman territorial integrity, especially when those groups became associated with designs of foreign powers to separate certain regions from the empire. This became evident in the Kurdish and Armenian regions after the conclusion of the Russo-Ottoman War in 1878, when the Berlin Treaty mandated reforms in the Armenian inhabited provinces to prevent attacks by Circassian immigrants and Kurds. This initiated the process of marking part of Kurdistan and beyond as the 6 Armenian provinces. So, as I've suggested elsewhere, not only did Kurds become marked citizens in post-Ottoman states and Iran, but their territory became marked as well in the process of minoritization. Kurds saw that their region, Kurdistan, which, like Armenia, had not been politicized until the late 19th century, was now being removed from maps. They also saw that what little of the empire remained was becoming Turkish, and not just through a demographic shift, but through a conceptual move. Demographically, the policy of deporting and dispersing Kurds, according to the no more than 5 to 10% of the population policy that had been developed during the war for Christians, was now underway with Kurds. Conceptually, Turkey's identity and territorial integrity, it was thought, could not accommodate alternate identities, especially those that were tied to ethnic territoriality. In Turkey, the East became the code word for Kurdistan, and whatever was not the East was unmarked. This occurred at the same time as the project to obliterate Kurdish identity did, a key component of which was remarking maps, not only to rub out Kurdistan, but village names as well. And this East became securitized before we had the name for it, securitization. In the early years of the Turkish Republic, we know that the Turkish state saw various forms of Kurdish resistance, such as the Sheikh Said uprising in 1925, the revolts in Ağrıdağ and Dersim in the late 20s and in 37, 38, as obvious security threats. The Turkish military crushed this resistance brutally. We know that the entire region, marked and euphemized as the East, became further securitized in the following decades through policing and strategies to break up Kurdish ties to their families and homelands. The periods that those who study the securitization of the Kurds investigate, which is mainly the 1980s to the present, may tacitly acknowledge these earlier periods in Republican history, but in fact, the process began even before Turkey officially became a state a century ago, although it's certainly changed in form and scope since then. The same could be said for Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And lastly, indeed, this marked territory can be considered an internal colony from late Ottoman times, as İlkay Yılmaz argues. While the East became a euphemism for Kurdistan in the Republican period, the region that comprised the East saw the Central Ottoman government make use of a combination of long-standing imperial practices and emerging colonial methods, including the establishment of new military hubs, the imposition of martial law, and special administrative regimes with expanded authority, population settlement schemes, the sedentarization of tribal groups, and the creation of smaller administrative units, all aimed at securing Kurdish loyalty while managing the so-called Armenian question. And I've described elsewhere how this area was a securitized zone, but Yilmaz's work connects internal colonization and securitization. She describes how the late 19th century practices focusing on securitization in the region also transformed the center of the Ottoman state in the framework of modern state formation, producing a shift by establishing the concept of security as its mainstay, a process that continued into post-Ottoman states. Indeed, I would argue that the East, in other words, Kurdistan, as a security zone, was established before Lausanne confirmed Turkey as an independent state. Although it initially evolved as a security zone against the supposed Armenian threat, the Kurds were always in the background. The various measures, security measures taken up by the Ottoman state and the security knowledge that was formed created a logic of security that was to affect Republican era administrators in the long term. Yilmaz notes that this logic of security should be approached alongside the long-term continuation of violence in the region. Thus, we have the historical frame for the connection of violence in Kurdistan to internal colonialism and states' permanent security imperatives. The other post-Ottoman side to this is the notion of Kurdistan as an international or interstate colony with the violence that colonialism entails, developed by Ismail Beşikçi, which I won't get into today. So in lieu of a conclusion, I'd just like to raise a question. What if we approached, what would, in fact, a wider history of the Middle East look like from the vantage point of the Kurds, one group that arguably suffered the brunt of the dynamics of post-Ottoman partition and state making? How would a wider history of the Middle East look from the vantage point of its largest permanently securitized and minoritized group? I'm finally done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Klein. We have, I think, 4 questions in the chat right now, but I'd like to see if any of those 4 people would like to pose their question in person by raising their hand. Let me see. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see everyone so well. Let me scroll through. If not,
well, in the meantime, I see someone asked what it means to historicize violence. And so basically what we're doing here is to understand violence in its historical context rather than attribute it to cultural or societal uh, causes. In other words, something that would be internal to the Kurds. So what we're looking at is what was happening in history and society that caused that violence to happen. That's all.
Okay, I see Sirwan Renas, who asked a question in the chat, would like to ask it in person.
Yes, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Klein. I really enjoyed the talk, and I have already had the benefit to read your book about the late Ottoman Empire and Hamidi Light Cavalry. So my question here is a more of conceptual and theoretical question about the concept of internal colony. As far as I have read, like some of these theories, the theory presupposes that the boundaries of the states are given. Like it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the theory itself is state-centric in a sense that it considers that the state has a people while the state have different types of peoples, let's say a multi-people state or multi-nation, multinational state, that one nation at the core who holds the power, the state power, participating in the colonialism, in the colonization of the other nation. But the concept of internal, especially like the internal part, seems that there is one nation that one portion of the population colonizes the other. While in the theories of colonialism, I mean not post-colonialism, I agree with you that the post-colonial concept doesn't capture the ongoing project of colonialism in Kurdistan. The internal term seems to me that there is an implicit denial for the projects of territorial decolonization and independence projects in the theory and the concept.
Let me just clarify
Yeah.
what you're asking. So you're suggesting, and I would agree with this, that the theory is state-centric, but I think that that's because we are exploring so at least in the period of nationalism, I would say that this is connected to minoritization because whose state does this belong to, right? And that is the construction. This isn't inherent, but this is a project, a historical project, right? Who is capturing the state on their own behalf, um, or in whose name? And obviously, we know that, and I think that Robson does a good job of showing this. A lot of state capture is for power and wealth of the elites, but it's often in the name of um, uh, the dominant national group, for example. So I think that that is why it's kind of necessarily state centric. But I think as Nilay shows in her work, this was even in, the imperial moment. Even before we might consider Ottomans thinking like a nation state. I hope that.
Yeah, thank you
kind of
so
what
much. And may I just follow up with one minor question? How about the structural conditions of the four states cooperating? Like, I mean, Ismail Beshikchi's work touched on this, the international or let's say interstate cooperation. Would you think that the internal colonialism theory also captures that structural condition that four states cooperating, like in in colonialism, or that's not the dimension there?
Well, I think they cooperate in the sense that they wish to maintain the integrity of their own borders. Even if sometimes this looks like, I mean, I'm by no means an expert in, current events, but even if this looks like colonizing other parts, so it's both, and I think it can be both.
Thank you so
And I
much.
think and obviously we know that the ways in which Iran and Iraq have kind of sort of cooperated, like in the context of the Iran-Iraq war, by either undermining the opposite Kurds or cooperating to suppress their own Kurds. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There's another good question in the chat from Huma. She says, how should we periodize in order to understand continuity or rupture in the forms of violence and in the ways Istanbul and later Ankara perceive the region, particularly in relation to debates on internal colonialism?
I think that the very recent work that has been done to decolonize Kurdish studies, that I mentioned, and I would suggest that South Atlantic Studies quarterly volume for starters, is so it's a kind of a new conversation, and so in order to decolonize Kurdish studies, one thing we also have to understand is not just the colonization of Kurdistan itself, but how we have known, how we have studied this process. But I think that the important work that I mentioned before by Nilay Uzok Gündoğan pushes this back much further in her concept of extractive colonialism. And, as she demonstrates what happened with, mining in the Ergani and Keban mines, that it pushes so we can periodize it much earlier than even I had imagined when I, was working on my book. And so I think her work brings that discussion to prominence in our discussion of periodization. So the ways Istanbul and later Ankara perceive this, I'm not sure that it is the same as how we're exploring it now in the scholarly community. That's what I can say to that right now.
Let's see. And there was also a question by Sardar. I guess this is your opinion. Why have the Darsim massacre, the Halabja gassing, and the Anfal campaign against the Kurds not been recognized by Western society or the international community as genocide?
I would say that this is political. It's simply political. What is recognized and what isn't, and I think that we see this playing out today. Although I would say that the international community has granted more that Halabja and the wider Anfal campaign were genocidal, but that again largely more so than even knowing what happened in Dersim. And that's because of the wider international community's interests in doing so, I would say. It's political, in other words. Not everybody listens to to genocide scholars.
Any last questions? All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today and for your rapt attention. Thank you, Dr. Klein, for being with us and for a great talk. I would like to let everyone know that this recording, that the lecture has been recorded and it will soon be posted by Zahra Institute, available for the public to view. And they will have an announcement about that on their Zahra Institute Facebook page, which I placed into the chat. And I also want to remind you, if you weren't here at the beginning, that this was the last event in the fall speaker series. The spring speaker series will start up in February with a talk by Shaynah Abdullah called Food Sovereignty and Local Farmer Oral Tradition and Local Farmer Oral Traditions and Heritage. And you can find details about the spring speaker series on the Zahra Institute webpage.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Jeanette. That was great.
Thanks. Who is that?
This is Sharina.
Oh, thank you, Sharina.
All right. I'll see you guys. Talk to you later, and happy holidays and happy new year.
Thanks, you too. And thanks, Jeanette, for moderating.
You're welcome. No problem.
I'll send you an email soon.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.